Well, today we're going to be in First Chronicles 28. We're nearing the end of the time when David is going to be king. So a couple fun things we get to talk about today. So David's getting ready he's old. He's unfortunately made mistakes as a king, so it's not running quite as well as it used to be. But if you remember back I believe it was in First Kings, Second Samuel, First Kings, somewhere in there, that if you remember that David had multiple wives. He had lots of children, and one of his sons had decided that he's going to take it upon himself to get himself appointed as the next king. So he starts to put this campaign together to kind of get the people to see him as the next king. David gets wind of it, and then they've got to hurry and put Solomon up there as king, basically. Even though Solomon is the one that's supposed to be king, the other one tried to take it from him. So we're going to go over that story again with a few other details today. So verse 1, and David assembled all the princes of Israel, the princes of the tribes, and the captains of the companies that ministered to the king by course, and the captains over the thousands, captains over hundreds, stewards over all the substance, and possession of the king and of his sons with the officers and with the mighty men, and with all the valiant men unto Jerusalem. Then David the king stood up upon his feet and said, Hear me, my brethren and my people. As for me, I had in mine heart to build an house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and for the footstool of our God, and had made ready for the building. But God said unto me, Thou shalt not build an house for my name, because thou hast been a man of war, and hast shed blood. Howbeit the Lord God of Israel chose me before all the house of my father to be king over Israel forever. For he hath chosen Judah to be the ruler, and the house of Judah, the house of my father. Among the sons of my father he liked me to make me king over all Israel. And of all my sons, for the Lord hath given me many sons, he hath chosen Solomon my son to sit upon the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. And he said unto me, Solomon thy son shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. Moreover, I will establish his kingdom forever, if he be constant to do my commandments and my judgments as at this day. Now therefore, in the sight of all Israel, the congregation of the Lord, and in the audience of our God, keep and seek for all the commandments of the Lord our God, that ye may possess this good land, and leave it for an inheritance for your children, for you forever. And thou, Solomon my son, know thou the God of thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart, and with a willing mind, for the Lord searcheth all hearts, and understandeth all the imaginations of the thoughts. If thou seek him, he will be found of thee, but if thou forsake him, he will cast thee off forever. Take heed now, for the Lord hath chosen thee to build an house for the sanctuary. Be strong and do it. So I'm going to pause here for just a second to again talk about the story. So we're getting here the speech that King David gave when he pulled these people together, the leaders of Israel, basically brought them all together and says, God appointed me to be king after Saul, and God has appointed my son Solomon to be king. So we're going to appoint him as king. Because if you remember back in the stories, that David had not died before Solomon took over, basically. So David was technically king, but Solomon was the acting king, basically. David was kind of a retired king / joint king with his son. So now we're in this chapter here in Chronicles, we're actually getting the speech, this more of that, what happened in that meeting, basically. We didn't get that in Kings, basically, in the book of Kings. So that's what's happened. He's talked to these people. Solomon's the next in line, basically. And remember, this was all motivated to kind of a rush. David knew Solomon was to be the next king, but David had another son who tried to politically get himself positioned in the eyes of the people as king, kind of build a political following, get people to follow him, and then he could kind of work his way into that position. So David had to hurry. While this guy was trying to be sneaky about it, someone heard, found out, went back to David. So David said, we got to do something quickly. So he hurried, pulled all the elders of Israel together. Because he's the king, how are you going to ignore that when the king says, I need you to come to this meeting? So he brought them all together and says, we are going to basically put Solomon as king right now. Let's get it done so we don't have this political struggle later. So let's see, verse 11, then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch, and of the houses thereof, and of the treasuries thereof, and of the upper chambers thereof, and of the inner parlors thereof, and of the place of the mercy seat, and the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of the Lord, of all the chambers round about, of the treasuries of the house of God, and of the treasuries of the dedicated things. So David received through inspiration, it says here, as he had by the Spirit, inspiration of what needs to be built. Here's the plans of how it's going to be built. But he wasn't allowed to build it. So he's giving these plans to his son Solomon so he can build it. Verse 13, also for the courses of the priests and the Levites, and for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and for all the vessels of service in the house of the Lord, he gave of gold by weight for things of gold, for all instruments of all manner of service, silver also for all instruments of silver by weight, for all instruments of every kind of service, even the weight for the candlesticks of gold, and for their lamps of gold, by weight for every candlestick, and for the lamps thereof, and for the candlesticks of silver by weight, both for the candlestick and also for the lamps thereof, according to the use of every candlestick. And by weight he gave pure gold for the tables of shewbread, for every table, and likewise silver for the tables of silver, pure gold for the flesh hooks, for the bowls to cups, and for the golden basins he gave gold by weight for every basin, and likewise silver by weight for every basin of silver. For the altar of incense, refined gold by weight, gold for the pattern of the chariot of the cherubims that spread out their wings and covered the ark of the covenant of the Lord. All this, said David, the Lord made me understand in writing by his hand upon me, even all the words of this pattern. So again, he's iterating, this is how much gold you should use to make a candlestick. This is how much gold you're going to use to build the altar, to build the lavers and different things. So he was instructed, basically David was given all the plans, all the instructions of how to put the temple together, everything together that God wanted him to do. He just wasn't allowed to build it. So David spent a lot of his time in king gathering the resources. Now Solomon's going to gather even more resources as well. He takes what David did and really ramps it up and does a lot more with it. But this gives us a little bit more insight into what happened at that meeting when Solomon was made king. And then this part here, where he's revealing the temple to Solomon, was probably not done during the coronation meetings. It was probably afterwards that David said, here, you get to build this. It's here, let me get you in on this, what I've got, and let you know what's going on, basically. This is probably more of a private conversation that they had in the palace later on. Verse 20, and David said to Solomon his son, be strong and of good courage, and do it. Fear not, nor be dismayed, for the Lord God, even my God, will be with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee, until thou hast finished all the work for the service of the house of the Lord. Now, if that verse sounds familiar, that should ring some thoughts and ring your ear a little bit and going, I've heard this verse before. I've heard this before. Where have I heard this? It's in a hymn. There's a hymn that goes on after that. I'm curious to see if any of you know what that hymn is. Put it in the comments what you think the hymn is that comes from. I don't believe they got those verses for that hymn from 1 Chronicles 28. I think they get it from some of the Psalms that David wrote that we're going to get into reading later when we get into the book of Psalms. I think some of the same wording was used over there as well. I could be wrong. Look at the bottom of the footnotes for that verse in the hymnal book. And if it says 1 Chronicles 28, then we'll know that it came from this. Verse 21, and behold, the courses of the priests and the Levites, even they shall be with thee for all the service of the house of God, and there shall be with thee for all manner of workmanship, every willing, skillful man. For any manner of service, also the princes and all the people will be holy at thy commandment. So Solomon has taken over basically. He's got the instructions of what to do. So he's starting to get into this plan of putting the temple together, getting this going and working. So let's jump into the next chapter as we continue this story.